Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm beyond thrilled to talk to Paul Rudnick about What Is Wrong with You. Welcome, Paul.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Paul is an Obie Award winner, an Outer Critics Circle Award winner, and a John Gassner Playwriting Award winner. Your shows have been on Broadway and on television and in movie theaters. You have just been all over the place and also at bookstores.
You bet.
So, Paul, can you give the audience an overview of what Is Wrong with You is about?
Oh, it's a comic novel. It's an exploration of love in every possible facet, including, first love, long-term marriage, divorce, widowhood, you name it. It all just comes together. It follows a kind of wide range of characters from every class, gender, race, you name it. And they all gradually intertwine and somehow end up at a destination wedding on a billionaire's private island off the coast of Maine. So it's a wild ride, but it's very affectionate, and it's just gets into everything that's going on right now and how crazy the world of emotion and commerce and you name it is going right now.
I think you, with this broader array of characters, you really have given us a little slice of everybody and everything. And of course, I think it's also important to say that this is also a love story to New York, which that always comes into your writing. And it's once again, it's laid out so beautifully. And we see the haves and the have-nots and those that are going up the ladder and some of them going down the ladder. So a curious thing is I found, so Rob loses his job, and what I'm going to call is he lost it because of a language police officer. Is that a fair assessment, maybe, to call it?
Very much so, because Rob has been on the job for about 30 years, and then a very young Gen Z sensitivity associate at his publishing house kind of targets him, and there points on both sides, but yeah, he's someone who really kind of falls victim to a new sense of surveillance, I think, in publishing, which is a little scary because it's a sense that every word, every attitude, every paragraph is now going to be policed just a bit, and it costs Rob everything, at least for a certain part of his life.
Yes. So, Paul, I'm going to ask you a personal question. Has this been something that you've encountered in your literary journey?
Sure. I mean, I think no one's really tried to stop me yet, because I think that's the real danger. I think everyone's allowed to have an opinion. Everyone can chime in. I've got the best editors, people who really will ask questions, will say, is this really what you wanted to say? That kind of thing. And I so appreciate that. But yeah, sometimes they've come up with the main trouble with censorship is it tends to be humorless. And when people don't realize that a character or a line or an attitude is satiric or comic in any way, then they can become very judgmental in the worst sense. That idea of, no, you are not allowed to say that, and I was grievously offended. And I find that very dangerous. So luckily, I've also had the gift of having many readers who enjoy the books and who think they're funny and who also love being challenged in a lot of ways and being shown every aspect of humanity. And a lot of that includes stuff that's pretty wild.
Well, and I think, I hate to use the term people of a certain age, but, each of us have a lived experience. So I came out in the 1980s. And so my lived experience really started as a gay man in the 80s. So I can't speak to what it was like in the 60s because I wasn't out. I was born in the 60s, but I wasn't out. So my life as a gay man started in the 80s. And there are things that we said in the 80s that are not politically correct now. But if you're quoting something from the 80s, I think you have to use the correct language to go with it. Things that have been invented since the 2000s, we didn't have in our arsenal in the 80s. It was a very different world. And while I don't like to be offensive to anyone, I also like to be true to what was said at that moment.
Oh, absolutely. I hate to lose history. I hate to lose, especially for people who were pioneers in many ways. And that this sense of trying to cram them into a more current niche seems very foolish, among other things, because you really want to honor people. And also, and you want to enjoy how we spoke back then, how we spoke in the 90s, how things changed in the aughts. I'm fascinated by history. So you really want to get it accurately instead of correctly, and I think and what I found, even with the very youngest readers, they welcome that. They like seeing a different world and how things evolve. And that's why I love to write about that. I love to get into the details of how the world changes.
So is it called an anteros? Is that the way you're pronouncing the word?
Yes, that sounds just right to me.
All right. So I found it so funny. I wrote a little note that I felt like it was a digital mood ring. And I think, for those of us who are old enough to remember mood rings, they were such a silly little invention. But I remember thinking, well, I would hate to be angry at someone because they would know, because they could look at my mood ring and see that.
Yeah, no. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
Would you explain to the audience what an anteros is?
Well, there is a character, one of the central characters is named Tron Meston, and he is a billionaire on the level of a Steve Jobs, a Elon Musk, a Mark Zuckerberg, someone who's really changed the culture in many ways, someone who's either gifted us or cursed us with every new form of tech. And his latest challenge, his latest agenda is to see if he can define and control love through tech, through the microchip, and he's really has the best of intentions to see if he can remove the mess and remove the despair and remove the sort of extract all of the difficult moments from a romantic relationship, which is, of course, impossible and not necessarily something you'd even want. But I could feel how tempting it might be. I think for all of us, anyone who's ever gone on a first date knows the anxiety levels and how they can skyrocket. So Tron has invented something, and I won't give all of it away because there's a build in the book, but after years of research and investment and innovation, he thinks he's discovered a device that will guide you instantly to your truest love and your soulmate and a lasting relationship, and that he will guarantee this. And the book follows what happens when that goes, of course, horribly and comically awry, when it works to a certain extent and then everything blows up in everyone's faces, because I think human emotion is never going to be that predictable or that easy to sort of lasso and contain. But I love the idea that someone would try, especially I think when people get that rich and that influential, they keep pushing the boundaries, as we're seeing right now with Elon Musk. They really want it all, and they want to be given credit, and they want to rule the world. And sometimes out of a misguided benevolence, they really feel, I know better and I will help everyone. And I love, it's great comic fodder because I love someone who really tries that and has the means and the time and the staff to create the Anteros.
It was so much fun to read. And of course, for me, I might even say it's a little frightening, because I would never do that, because I really think I hide my emotions a little bit better than some people. So I really don't need a machine telling the world what I'm really thinking or feeling. So I was just like, oh no, I would never do that. This is meant to be as a joke, but it is true. I actually drowned my Alexa 2 weeks ago. I was so tired of the damn thing listening to me. I just put it in the sink and I drowned it.
I completely sympathize. I think, no. I mean, I've got too many devices in my home, and I do feel that at some point they will take over and murder me, or at least start calling people on my behalf and ruin everything. But yeah, it can be daunting. And once in a while, I try to remember, being, as you say, of a certain age, what was it like before all this tech? And the awful thing is I have trouble trying to recall, did we have enormous amounts of free time? Were when we had to write a letter or use a push button phone? And how crude was that? So it's fascinating to realize, a lot of these innovations are great and have changed the world for the better and given us an enormous amount of access. Give me just a minute. Also, the one thing that I think is, well, not the one thing, but something that's incredibly helpful, especially for young people, is a sense of being able to access the entire world. That when there's an awful lot of fear and prejudice out there, the fact that you can connect with like-minded people, with a support group, with a network, I think that's a wonderful change. Before we had to actually go to a coffee shop and talk to people. But it's really interesting.
Or try to find a therapist to date for free therapy.
Oh, exactly. Although I have friends who are therapists, and it's all on Zoom now, as we're doing, and it makes an enormous difference. You have a lot less travel time, and oddly, it can become even more intimate. That I think sometimes, if you're in the same room with someone, you're a little daunted, and you're a little nervous, and you're a little aware of how you're coming off. On Zoom, I think there can be more of a freedom. And it sort of emerged during the pandemic when I was having meetings and talking to my editor and things all over Zoom. And it was almost scarily convenient, when suddenly you just don't have to leave your couch and the world comes to you. And it's why in the book, in What Is Wrong With You, it's both about how people have taken full advantage of tech, but also what it means to finally get in the car and go somewhere and come face to face with people and also confront your problems with an immediacy without the barrier of a screen. And it's a fascinating time to be alive. Also, the way that tech has changed both in playwriting and in novels, where years ago, a lot of plays would open with a maid answering the phone and filling the audience in on everything, on all the background and the exposition they needed to know. Nowadays, no, everyone's got that phone in their pocket, so that it's both more convenient, but you have to figure out it's a technical challenge. Okay, when everyone can call everyone up or text everyone or do a search, how does that change your relationship to the world and the people you love?
I think it changes it a lot. I do agree with you that connectivity is a wonderful thing, but I also find that tech can, if you're not sure of yourself, you're easily misguided. So
Right.
If you just aren't sure of yourself, then you go online and you look up all of these things. And of course, every time you have a sniffle, you're dying of the worst disease on earth because Google said you're either pregnant or dying of cancer. There's no other two ways about it. You're dead. So it's just one of those things you have to be careful with it because it is such a blessing, but it can be a millstone around your neck as well.
Yeah, no, my partner's a doctor. So when I do exactly what you just said, when I consult, Dr. Google, and I find the 8 symptoms of whatever I'm convinced will kill me later today, he sort of looks at me with both kind of pity and disgust. And I realize, wait, I'm living with Dr. Google. Sometimes I actually find something useful. The other thing you have to learn to do, I think, with anything online is, it's sort of like I remember when I first looked at horoscopes, and because I'm very gullible, I'd believe all of them. I'd make them come true. If you look at 4 horoscopes a day, they will contradict each other, so you don't have to worry so much.
That's
right.
So
yeah, I would say multiple sources is always a good idea.
So now I do have to ask, how has your partner's reception been to this book since you kill him off very early on, so to speak?
Oh, well, I know he is in no way that character at all.
Okay, all right.
Versions of John, but no. And I think he sometimes does imagine things are based on him, and he takes it a little personally. But no, he's incredibly supportive and understanding. So no, but it's very much not him. I thought if he wants me, someday I will write about him more particularly, and then he will leave me.
Oh well, don't do it too soon, then, Paul. Don't do it too
Exactly.
soon. I will say that the relationship of Rob and Jake is just so beautiful, and you did it with such love and such delicacy that you feel the things that Rob feels for Jake. And that I think is a difficult thing to do as a writer, and I think you pulled it off beautifully.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, because one thing I've done in a lot of my work, I love celebrating a kind of gay happiness because I think for so long, even sympathetically, there's been so much gay trauma out there. There's been
Mhm.
many stories about the agony of coming out, completely justified. And Lord knows, I lived through the peak of the AIDS crisis. But that's why I think it's so important to have a balance, which is why I love gay love stories and why I like getting into the mechanics of how gay people really behave around each other.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I've always felt it was a gift. I always felt for any, especially gay writer, it's something you really need to earn and be worthy of. But yeah, I'm so glad you liked Jake and Rob because I adore them. And yeah, and they face the biggest challenges anyone can go through, in terms of mortality. And I know people who've gone through that. And I think one of the other facts of the AIDS crisis was when you lose an enormous amount of friends, family, lovers at a very young age, it changes your chemistry. You realize, okay, usually you have to wait till much later in life to experience that degree of loss. But there's a generation, especially men
Mhm.
and women and everybody else, but who went through that, and it's fascinating. You just a lot. It's also when you've lived through a certain amount of history, when you've lived through 9/11 and the pandemic and everything else, it doesn't minimize anything, but you realize, okay, I have been here. There's something actually that my partner once told me from his education, his background as a doctor, is that a lot of diseases do tend to have arcs, and epidemics have arcs. And as
Mhm.
awful and as tragic and as irrefutable as they are, things mutate and change. And once you take that step back, it's helpful as a writer to say, okay, I know where we've been.
Right. And I think, Paul, I think that is the finger on the pulse when you start thinking and talking about, I have been here and I see where I've been, because living through the AIDS crisis and then through a pandemic, 9/11, as you mentioned, these are life changing, life altering, traumatic events. But those of us who are here, we have a responsibility to say, we are here and we were here, and we have to tell our stories. That is what we do as a culture. It's what we should do as a culture anyway. And I also loved Rob and Sean's bromance. That was just so cute.
Well, something, I mean, this is very much at the core of the book. It's a friendship, a very devoted friendship between a gay guy and a straight guy. And they just enjoy each other and they give each other permission to say the most outrageous things. And I'd never quite seen that. And I've experienced it. So I really wanted to see if I could get that right. But yeah, I love that. That sense that, especially there are certain kinds of straight men who I've met who are so genuinely and deeply confident that they're not threatened by women or by gay men, or they enjoy it and they also, I think, there are straight men who feel very flattered by gay attention
Sure,
and they kind of
sure.
bask in it. And I think that's hilarious and kind of sweet in a way. They somehow imagine that every gay man is their fan, which is something true. um, but I love that kind of um, great self assurance that allows you to be curious about the world rather than being scared of it.
I love.
Sean certainly has that. Because Sean is a personal trainer. He's also he had been the star of a TV show as a superhero, but he's somebody who loves dealing with people, and that's something I admire. Somebody who can really figure out, what a client needs, what they'll respond to, when to listen, when to be a little bit more proactive. And Sean really is good at what he does.
I love that too. And there's a point in one of the chapters where Rob says, he comments mentally on Sean having said something that brought them down to being 8-year-olds. And then Rob says something even further and even more fantastical. And in his mind, he says, and now we're at 5 years old. And I just love that because it's, and it's just the opposite of what happened with Rob in his work career. So he's having the exact opposite fun with Sean. And I'm like, that's so cute. It was, and I mean, I know it was meant to be because the two parallels are so clear. Yeah. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because I think that it's when I was writing it, it had what I got sort of a tingle. That's my favorite part of writing. When you think for a second, ooh, should I really keep this in? Do I cross that line? Do I dare to go? Oh, no, that's the good stuff. That's how we really behave. That's what novels do wonderfully well, is to say, okay, no one's listening. How do you really talk? And get down and dirty. Because I love that as an aspect of friendship, that sense of, okay, when I'm with this guy or this woman, I could say whatever I feel like. And we'll look at each other and go, I can't believe you just said that. And I'll top you.
Right.
I mean, I think it's one of the interesting things about the internet is people started behaving that way online without quite realizing, you're in public now. And it was when there was a rule that has been broken by everyone, including me, which was never put anything in an email that you wouldn't want read out loud in court. But there was a period also when so many kids were posting, nude selfies everywhere in those drunken trips to Cancun. And then they didn't realize, wait, your future employers do have Macs. They will take a look. And I think what's good is that a lot of that has kind of, people have relaxed a little bit. But yeah, there's a sense of, it's awfully easy to just go on X or TikTok and spew. And it can be dangerous, but it's something where I appreciate the impulse to say, okay, just let it rip. This is what I really think in the worst parts of my brain. But I love in writing that you can include all of that, the best and the worst of everyone. And it's sort of like telling secrets.
It is, but it's a direct mirror on humanity, because there are things I do with some friends that I would never do with other friends. But it's just, you've got this kind of comfort level, especially if it's a long shared history. A friend of mine passed away in December, and since he passed away, the number of things I have thought of, and I thought, he's the only person that would remember this. And, that's one of those things that, you've got to celebrate that, because we do have those friends that know all the intimate, gory details and all the triumphs and all the failures, and you can share with them. But I think that's the best of storytellers, creates characters who do that. And that's what you have filled this book with, those for sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that it's why we cherish our friends. They're the people who also tell you, get over yourself.
Yes.
How many times are you going to tell me that story? I think that's the eternal value of friendship, is people who kind of either literally or figuratively slap you in the face and say, enough already.
That's right.
And also there's such a refuge when you're in the workplace often, or when you're with your family, you're on a different kind of good behavior.
That's right.
And you're a little anxious and a little tense, and you realize, nope, I can't say that, even if half my brain cells are dying to. But when I can get on the phone or next to, a good pal, I can say everything. And I can get it out of my system. And it's a good release kind of valve, where you say, okay, if I say all of my most terrible thoughts to you, I won't be so nervous about blurting them out, in a meeting.
That's it. So the title of the book is What is Wrong with You? And I will tell you that oftentimes I text a friend of mine a much longer and much saltier version of this book title. It's a rhetorical question, but I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with people? And I think that's an everyday emotion in this world. It's like my mother used to say, you should save something to tell Jesus if you ever meet him, which I'm like, some people online should save it for Jesus, because this is going on. You've told me too much.
Oh yeah, no, although I love the idea of dishing with Jesus and getting there and saying, okay, the ultimate, down and dirty. Because that certainly would be my kind of Jesus. When I settled on the title, I realized people love to say it, and people say it to me so often. And I say it right back. That sense of where you stare at someone and say, what is wrong with you? How could you say or do that? Were you raised by wolves?
Right.
So I really wanted to reflect that, because it's so common. I mean, and the minute I picked that as a title, I would hear it everywhere all day long. And it's become unconscious. It's sort of the new version of, hello, excuse me, and thank you, although it's said far more often. But yeah, no, it's kind of the universal response.
I think it is indeed. So you're out on the 25th, is that right?
That's it, of March.
Perfect. This is such
pre-order now.
Yep. Such a wonderful read. Pre-order the book now. You won't regret it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. This was a treat.
Oh, lovely. Do you have a website or social media you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I'm at paulrudnick.com. I have a website with just about everything on it. I'm on X at Paul Rudnick NY. I'm on Instagram, just at Paul Rudnick. Facebook, you name it. I'm out there.
I love it. I love it. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Oh, me.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.